The woman standing beneath the old maple tree was holding a faded paper ring in her trembling hand, and before I could ask why she had come back after 27 years, she looked straight into my eyes and reminded me that I had once promised to marry her. What shattered me was not the promise itself, but the quiet reason she had waited so long to ask me to keep it. Before I tell you what happened next, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances. Your support helps our community continue sharing stories that remind us even the oldest wounds can still heal. That I had not seen Laurel Whitmore since the summer we were 12. Back then, she lived 2 houses away from me in the small lakeside town of Bellwether, Vermont, where the mornings smelled like pine needles, warm bread, and damp grass. Laurel had copper-brown hair she usually tied with a blue ribbon, a crooked front tooth she refused to be embarrassed about, and a laugh that made even unhappy adults turn their heads and smile. I was Callum Mercer, a quiet boy who spent more time repairing bicycles in my father's shed than talking to other children. Laurel was the only person who never treated my silence as something that needed fixing. She simply sat beside me, handed me tools, and filled the empty air with stories about places we would visit when we grew up. On the last afternoon before her family moved away, we sat beneath the maple tree behind my house and made rings from strips of notebook paper. Laurel slipped hers onto my finger and asked me to promise that if neither of us had found the right person by the time we were 40, we would marry each other. I laughed because 40 sounded older than the moon, but I promised. She made me say it twice. Then her father called from the car, and she ran away without looking back because she knew that if she did, she would cry. For years, I kept the paper ring inside a wooden box with old coins, baseball cards, and a photograph of Laurel standing beside a crooked snowman. I wrote 3 letters to the address she had given me, but all 3 were returned. Her family had moved again, and in those days, losing someone could happen quietly. There were no social networks, no easy searches, no digital footprints to follow. Eventually, school became work, work became responsibility, and responsibility became the shape of my entire life. My father suffered a severe stroke when I was 23, and I stayed in Bellwether to care for him while running his struggling repair shop. My mother had died years earlier, and there was no one else. I told myself I would leave once he recovered, but he never fully did. By the time he passed away, I was 35, exhausted, financially strained, and so accustomed to putting my own life aside that I no longer knew what I wanted from it. That I came close to marriage once. Her name was Marin Holt, a thoughtful elementary school teacher with patient eyes and a calm voice. We were together for 4 years, but she eventually accepted a job in Oregon. She asked me to go with her, and I almost said yes. Yet when the day came to decide, fear disguised itself as duty. I told her the shop needed me, the town depended on me, and starting over was irresponsible. The truth was simpler and harder. After losing so many people, I had learned to avoid choosing anything I might later lose. Marin left without anger. She only told me that refusing to risk heartbreak was another way of refusing to live. Her words stayed with me long after the relationship ended. On the morning Laurel returned, I was 39 years and 11 months old. The repair shop had expanded into a modest bicycle and outdoor equipment business, and I was outside replacing a weathered sign when I noticed a silver car parked near the old maple tree. The woman beside it looked both familiar and completely changed. Time had softened Laurel's face, but it had not changed the way she tilted her head when she was uncertain. Her blue ribbon was gone, replaced by a loose knot of copper-brown hair streaked with silver. She held a small envelope against her chest. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she smiled, and I was 12 again, kneeling in the grass with glue on my fingers and a paper ring around my hand. Laurel told me she had found me through an article about the shop in a regional magazine. She had driven from Connecticut that morning and arrived just after sunrise. We walked to the maple tree, where the branches cast moving shadows across the ground. She opened the envelope and removed the paper ring I had made for her 27 years earlier. The edges were yellow, the ink nearly faded, but my childhood handwriting was still visible. I had written, "For Laurel," until we are 40. I tried to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. She asked if I remembered the promise. I told her I did. Then she said she had come because she needed me to keep my word. At first, I thought she was joking or trying to turn an old memory into something sweet. But Laurel's hands were shaking. She explained that she was not asking for a wedding that day, nor was she expecting me to love her simply because 2 children had made a promise. She wanted a chance. A real chance. She was turning 40 in 6 weeks, and after everything that had happened in her life, she no longer wanted fear to make her decisions. The strange directness of her request unsettled me. I had imagined reunions as gentle things filled with nostalgia, not as doors suddenly opened onto choices I had spent years avoiding. We spent the day walking through Bellwether. Laurel showed me photographs of her life, college in Montreal, years working as a museum conservator, a marriage at 29, and a daughter named Wren. Her husband, Peter, had died in a boating accident 5 years earlier. Wren had survived, but she carried scars along one side of her leg and a deep fear of water. Laurel spoke carefully, without seeking pity. After Peter's death, she devoted herself entirely to raising Wren and rebuilding their lives. She had not dated seriously. Then, 8 months earlier, doctors discovered a problem with her heart. It was treatable, but the surgery carried risks, and she had delayed it twice because she was afraid of leaving Wren alone. Her cardiologist finally warned her that postponing it again could be more dangerous than the operation itself. The promise, Laurel said, was not about escaping her fear or finding someone to rescue her. It was about remembering who she had been before loss taught her to expect the worst. As a child, she had believed promises meant people returned. She had kept the paper ring because it reminded her that someone once saw a future with her before life became complicated. She wanted to know whether that future had been entirely imaginary. I should have responded with tenderness. Instead, panic made me cruel. I told her we were strangers, that childhood promises were not contracts, and that she could not appear after 27 years carrying grief, a daughter, and a medical crisis, then ask me to become part of it all. Laurel's face changed, not with anger, but with quiet humiliation. She folded the paper ring into her palm and apologized. She said she had mistaken memory for meaning. Then she walked toward her car while the bright afternoon sun shone across the lake as if nothing painful had happened. I watched her leave, telling myself I had been honest. Yet honesty without compassion can become cowardice wearing respectable clothes. For the next several days, I could not work properly. Every bicycle bell sounded like Laurel's childhood laughter. Every time I passed the maple tree, I remembered how she had sat beside me when I was a lonely boy and never demanded that I become louder, braver, or easier to understand. I found my wooden box in the back room of the shop and opened it for the first time in years. Inside was the ring she had made for me. On it, in her uneven handwriting, were the words, "Callum always comes back." I contacted the magazine editor who had forwarded Laurel's original message and asked whether he still had her email address. By late morning the next day, I had written an apology, but I deleted it because words seemed too easy. Instead, I closed the shop and drove to Connecticut. The journey took 4 hours beneath a pale blue sky. I arrived at the address Laurel had once written on the envelope she mailed to the magazine, only to find the house empty. A neighbor told me Laurel was at a community rehabilitation center with her daughter. I found them in a sunlit courtyard. Wren was 15, slender, serious, and using a cane while practicing steps between 2 low rails. Laurel stood nearby, clapping each time her daughter completed another careful pass. When Laurel saw me, she froze. I expected anger, but she only looked tired. Wren studied me with the direct suspicion of someone who had watched her mother endure too much. I apologized without defending myself. I told Laurel that she had not been wrong to come, but I had been afraid of what her request awakened in me. I had spent years hiding behind duty and routine because they could not abandon me. Her arrival had forced me to see that I had confused safety with peace. I admitted I could not promise marriage simply because of what we said at 12, but I could promise not to run away before learning who she had become. I asked whether she would allow me to stay for the afternoon. Laurel did not forgive me immediately. That mattered. Real forgiveness should not erase consequences. She told me I had made her feel foolish during one of the most vulnerable moments of her life. She said she had not expected a husband on command, she had only hoped the boy who once understood her might still exist somewhere inside the man. I accepted every word. Then Wren surprised us both by saying her mother had talked about Bellwether for years, especially the maple tree and the quiet boy who fixed broken things. She asked whether I could repair the loose wheel on her rehabilitation chair. It was not forgiveness, but it was an opening. Over the next 6 weeks, I divided my time between Bellwether and Connecticut. I repaired the chair, helped Wren adjust the brakes on a modified bicycle, and listened as Laurel told me the parts of her life she had hidden during our first reunion. Her marriage to Peter had been loving but imperfect. After his death, she blamed herself because she had encouraged the family boat trip. Wren blamed herself because she had asked her father to go farther onto the lake. Both had carried guilt that belonged to neither of them. I began to understand that Laurel's request beneath the maple tree had not come from desperation. It came from a decision to stop allowing tragedy to define every relationship that remained. Laurel also learned the truth about me. She saw the man who had cared for his father with devotion, but she also saw how I used that devotion to avoid building a life afterward. She challenged me when I treated loneliness as proof of strength. She reminded me that being needed was not the same as being known. Our connection did not return in one dramatic moment. It grew through ordinary daylight hours, coffee beside hospital windows, walks through botanical gardens, grocery trips, quiet drives, and afternoons helping Wren regain confidence on her bicycle. 3 days before Laurel's surgery, fear overwhelmed her. She called me from a hospital courtyard and said she was considering postponing again. I drove there and found her sitting beneath a white flowering tree, staring at the consent forms in her lap. I did not tell her to be brave. I told her bravery was not the absence of terror, it was choosing the future while terror was still present. Then I placed the old paper ring in her hand beside the one she had kept. I told her the promise we made as children had been incomplete. Marriage was not something owed because of time, memory, or fear. Love had to be chosen by the people we were now. But I also told her I had chosen to remain, through the surgery, the recovery, and whatever came after, if she still wanted me there. Laurel cried quietly in the bright courtyard. She said she did not need me to fulfill a childish agreement. She needed to know whether I could make an adult promise and understand its weight. I told her I could. For once in my life, I did not qualify the answer. The surgery took place early on a clear Thursday morning. Wren and I sat together beside a wall of windows while sunlight moved slowly across the floor. Hours passed. I tried to stay calm for Wren, but she eventually reached over and held my hand because she knew I was afraid too. When the surgeon finally entered and told us the procedure had gone well, Wren began to sob. I closed my eyes and felt something inside me break open, not grief, but relief so powerful it hurt. Recovery was not easy. Laurel experienced complications that kept her hospitalized longer than expected, and frustration sometimes made her sharp and withdrawn. I stayed without pretending I could fix everything. Wren continued therapy and eventually rode her modified bicycle around the hospital garden in full daylight, with Laurel watching from a wheelchair. It was the first time since the accident that Wren had moved quickly without fear. Laurel laughed through tears, and I realized I had spent most of my life repairing objects because people could not be restored so simply. Yet healing, I learned, was not returning to what existed before. It was discovering what could still be built from what remained. On Laurel's 40th birthday, we returned to Bellwether. The maple tree was beginning to turn gold. Wren hung 2 small paper rings from a low branch, then walked toward the lake to give us privacy. Laurel told me she no longer wanted me to marry her because of a promise made by 2 frightened children facing separation. She wanted me to marry her only if I could stand beside her without believing love guaranteed safety. I took a small wooden box from my pocket. Inside was not a diamond ring, but a simple gold band engraved with the words, "I came back." I told her I could not promise that life would be painless. I could not promise that neither of us would ever be afraid. But I promised I would not confuse fear with a reason to leave. I promised to speak when silence became a wall, to stay when staying was difficult, and to love Ren not as an obligation but as a person whose courage had changed me. Then I asked Laurel whether she would choose me, not because she had waited 27 years, but because we had finally learned how to live in the present. She said yes beneath the same tree where we had once been children. We married the following spring in a daytime ceremony beside the lake. Ren walked Laurel down the aisle without her cane. Marin, the woman I had once been too afraid to follow, sent a kind letter wishing me peace. I wrote back and thanked her for telling me the truth years earlier, even though I had not been ready to hear it. The repair shop became a family business, and Laurel opened a small restoration studio in the space above it. Ren helped design adaptive bicycles for people recovering from injuries, turning her own pain into freedom for others. Before this story ends, please leave a meaningful comment about a promise, a person, or a second chance that changed your life. Sometimes the words we share remind someone else that it is not too late to return, forgive, begin again, or finally choose courage. I once believed keeping my childhood promise meant marrying Laurel because I had said I would. I understand now that the deeper promise was never about a wedding. It was about becoming someone capable of returning with honesty, humility, and an open heart. Laurel did not come back to collect a debt from the past. She came back to ask whether hope still had a place in our future. By answering her, I saved more than an old promise. I saved the part of myself that had been waiting beneath that maple tree for 27 years. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Some promises are not meant to trap us in who we were. They are meant to guide us toward who we still have time to become.